Tax the rich has been a popular meme on the left for a very long time. And it's understandable because social mobility is declining, inequality is rising. A tiny fraction of the population is benefiting now more than ever from our collective social arrangement, while the average person is finding it harder and harder to save money at all, let alone buy a home, start a family. You can blame the lack of industriousness on the part of the average American for that, but that would neglect the fact that the average American is what he is, largely as a result of social engineering on the part of that same elite who is now disproportionately reaping the benefits of our economic paradigm. Who is responsible for how the average guy turns out? Could it be the people who wrote the curriculum for public education, who forced toxic ideologies down the throats of children, victim narratives, narratives of white guilt? Could it be the people who have run intelligence agencies to manipulate our social networking sites to affect literal thought control? Could it be the people who invented MK Ultra? Could it be the media elite who have no regard for the moral consequences of the content that until very recently they basically had a monopoly on? The individual average guy is not responsible for how the population at large is. The Rockefellers are responsible. The Rothschilds are responsible. The people who own Pfizer and Monsanto, they are actually in a position where their decisions impact the well-being of the average guy, for better or worse. And I would argue it has been largely for the worse in a lot of industries, including government. So blaming the average guy doesn't make sense, is unjust. And since the people who are at the top of the economic ladder have gotten there by doing things like getting the average American addicted to opioids, right? They've done things like monocrop agriculture, which is lowering the nutrient density of our food. They've done things like introduce GMO products that mean they can cut down on basically labor in agriculture, automate more jobs in agriculture, and they'll tell us that we would starve if not for these GMO crops and the pesticides and all of that. It's like, yeah, because you took all of the land, through shady business practices over a century. You kicked the people who had been farmers off of their land, found ways of getting them massively in debt, took over the farms. And now you're saying we would starve if not for people like Monsanto. It's like, yeah, if you don't give us the land back, then we would starve. 100 years ago, still, the average American was a farmer. So perhaps that could address that problem to some extent. Just let people go back to the traditional way of life. Stop messing with them. Stop the social engineering. Stop the toxic ideologies and all of that stuff, rather than blaming the average Joe for not working hard enough. People like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, will make this point that, of course, there's not equality of outcomes because there's not equality of effort or an equality of innate talent. Now, it is arguable how beneficial redistribution policies actually end up being. You can give people at the bottom money, but that doesn't fix the social problems that underlie the inability of a lot of groups in America to rise up. So how effective it actually is, just, taking money from one class and giving it to another is debatable. But also, the kind of people who actually get their wealth redistributed are like upper middle class people. They're the rich in the sense that technically they're the top 1%, but it ends up being like some conscientious, hardworking Gentile family that, ends up paying an effective 60% tax rate. Meanwhile, the owners of Pfizer, the owners of the Federal Reserve Bank, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, they don't actually have their wealth and power taken away from them. Instead, that redistribution, tax the rich, just ends up being a wedge to suppress the ability of people to actually move up into positions of real social power. So, you are effectively just making it easier for the actual social elite to maintain their monopoly on power. Not all rich people are the same. When you say tax the rich, if you're talking about the Rothschilds, okay, let's do it. If you're talking about the people who have poisoned our food and polluted our environment, even just CEOs at Monsanto, yeah, go ahead, take their wealth. They're criminals. They've benefited from poisoning us all. Our sperm rates are declining because of these industrial chemicals that we're all exposed to. Yeah, these people are villains. Take their stuff. Sue Pfizer for the opioid epidemic. Sue Monsanto for all of the chemical exposure we've been exposed to. Take all of their wealth. Go ahead. That's good. I'm fine with that. Some guy who's like an orthodontist and has put in a lot of work and went to school for 12 years and comes from himself like a middle-class family, don't take his money. He's fine. He's a good guy. There is a big difference between the parasitical elite who are imposing costs on society in order to aggrandize themselves and, ordinary people who are working hard to win social prestige. Yeah. There's also the issue of deeply inherited wealth where, the settling of this country involved land grants in the tens of millions of acres for certain families, the Van Rensselaers, or, a lot of the families in the Deep South that got all of this land. They didn't homestead it. The Crown issued them this territory. And while not all of that land is controlled by those very same families did sell the land to others and profited from that. And a lot of those same families are in prominent social positions throughout the country. So because your ancestor was given land by the King of England, I don't think that means you deserve this disproportionate, massive influence over the direction of our society. We do live in an oligarchy, effectively. So if you have wealth, and you're using it to lobby government, you have a much bigger say in what happens. And I think it's important that the kinds of people who are impacting policy are actually selected through some kind of meritocratic mechanism. And wealth doesn't do that, because it's not the conscientious, hardworking people who've put in a lifetime of work that end up lobbying Congress. It's people who are connected to international finance, people who have parasited off of average people, the financial class. This resistance to tax the rich makes sense because in practice, taxing the rich means the elites punishing their upper middle class rivals and like securing their position. But the idea that some redistribution would be beneficial, I think, should be universally accepted. Our whole financial system guarantees perpetual debt slavery. There's no way around that. And I've never heard a good argument against this proposition that fractional reserve banking guarantees that debt will only increase. The people who are allowed to effectively print money will grow richer. The Federal Reserve is this font of liquidity. All the new money comes in to circulation through loans to initially privileged commercial banks that get like the prime rates, right? And then those same commercial banks turn around and lend at a higher rate of interest, just guaranteeing themselves wealth. This was not devised by impartial economists. The very bankers who benefit from this system, the Rockefellers, the lackeys of the Rothschilds basically, went to Jekyll Island and concocted this scheme to completely control our financial system. And those people, those families have benefited over the last century from that. It wasn't democratically instituted. So, the structure of our financial system does guarantee increased inequality with time. And it also guarantees that the financial class, the bankers, will be the beneficiaries of this arrangement. I would say it would be completely just to hold them, like international finance, criminally liable for the lost time that countless millions of ordinary working people have had to spend paying interest on all of these loans, not just their own personal debt, but government debt as well. We collectively, as an economy, are spending, it's hard to say, 30, 40% of our time, half of our time, paying down interest. We're just paying the bankers. You know what I mean? I think the intuition behind this would be a lot simpler if you, kind of cut down the number of people you're talking about. Because, people often wonder, how is it that the entire world is in debt? America is in debt to China, but also China is in debt. All these countries are in debt. All the peoples of all these countries are in debt. To whom? Who does the world owe all this money to? It seems totally bizarre and insane. How many people is it? Is it millions of people in this financial class that's benefiting from this huge amount of debt and usury imposed on humanity? And it has been imposed top down. The central banks have been slipped in through bureaucratic channels and backdoor entries. It's never popularly chosen by the people. Totally undermines our democracy, of course. But anyway, so who do we owe the money to? If it was just one guy, there was one guy that the planet owed hundreds of trillions of dollars to, I think most people wouldn't have a problem with saying, okay, sorry, buddy, we're not going to pay you back. We're not doing this. Because it's people's lives that are being spent in economic activities they don't have to engage in. They wouldn't have to engage in except for the financial obligation to pay all this money back with interest. Now, in a healthy economy, you can't just have loans that go, totally neglected. But in our financial system, we have predatory, usurious criminals who have controlled our political system. They use the government to offset liability from themselves, to ensure their balance sheets. They use the government for debt collection. And they get bailouts from the government in the trillions that the taxpayer pays for. So yeah, tax the rich should mean I don't know, get the Rockefeller dynasty, the Rothschild dynasty, all of these banking elites together, punish them for their crimes against humanity, and take their assets, redistribute those assets. That would be fine. I would be happy with that. And also, so giving people money, just giving a handout, giving UBI, ends up being another mechanism of control for whoever ends up being in elite social positions. It gives you leverage over ordinary people. Instead, this is an important point. We have to realize that our current agricultural system is untenable. We are degrading the quality of the soil every year. Crop yields are going down, and especially the nutrient density is going down. We're not fixing this in our current agricultural methods. It's arguable whether we can continue monocrop, industrial scale agriculture. We have to return to more traditional methods. We have to use regenerative methods, or our food supply will not be secure. It's absolutely essential that we start changing our agricultural system. So here's what I think should be done. We should hold the financial class accountable for their crimes. We should hold the people who own the pharmaceutical companies responsible for their crimes. The people at Monsanto, the other big GMO and chemical manufacturers in big agriculture. Hold these people accountable. They've poisoned, all the stuff I've been talking about. There's demonstrated ways in which they have harmed the average person. So sue these people, jail these people, take their assets, and then, the government has all these assets now. Devise a program where you get people into more traditional agricultural communities. Develop the infrastructure where there's, a good-sized, local hub. Use existing towns when possible, but you divide up farmland that has been seized from some of these giant corporations, or you start purchasing farmland, as the government, and you basically have people sign up in groups, because it won't necessarily be pragmatic to have individuals being individually accountable. Agriculture is kind of a collective activity, and we need to go back to a more traditional way of life, more local community and stuff like that. I think this would be one of the only ways of actually fixing our society as a whole. If the government had a program after punishing all these criminals and taking their stuff, if they had a program where if you got a certain number of people together to form an agricultural co-op, then the government's going to facilitate it, and they're going to put you on track to lease to own, whatever. You don't even have to necessarily just give it away. But, the saying goes if you teach a man to fish, he'll feed himself for life. If you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. I mean, if you facilitate people getting the land back, getting back on the land, they can feed themselves forever, right? None of these arguments against the ineffectiveness of redistribution apply. We have to fix our agriculture system. More people have to be back on the land farming. We have to facilitate it. So, I mean, to me, looking at the situation in America in general, it looks like, you know, the actual social elites encourage this fake socialism, fake tax the rich on the left that means them just being able to punish their upper middle class rivals and white people. And they encourage the fake economic right, libertarian perspective that argues against any form of redistribution. That way, the criminals at the top are lumped in with the hardworking orthodontist from the right, and effectively through bureaucratic mechanisms, actual redistribution policies end up targeting not the true elites, but just like the average orthodontist guy. That's kind of the situation that I see, and it's a false dichotomy. And like, it's a much simpler solution than I think people would realize, because wealth is so much more highly concentrated than like people are able to conceive. I think you could fix the whole economic paradigm, address the issue of elite parasitism and the costs they're imposing on our society. You could do that very easily by getting a list of 10,000 names and rounding those people up. And, you know, think about these same people who've gotten us in wars, who profit. You know, I didn't even address like the military-industrial complex, really. But they've gotten us into wars for their own profit, and they accept casualties. You know, 1 million innocent Iraqis died. I don't know if all of them were innocent, but, you know, we accept a certain number of casualties in the name of spreading democracy. Well, how about this? We have a threat to our democracy and the very existence of our society in the form of a social elite that is totally unaccountable, is poisoning us, is subjecting us to toxic ideology, all this stuff, right? Maybe we can't like prove man by man that all 10,000 of the people on this list are one of the bad guys. But hey, for the sake of democracy, there will be some casualties, and we're willing to accept that. It's the same logic they have used. They're willing to accept casualties. When they do a false flag, when they kill 3,000 people in a high-rise building somewhere, or a couple of them, when they do that, that's an acceptable human cost. Well, maybe it's an acceptable cost that a couple of Pfizer executives get treated a little bit too harshly. Maybe these people are guilty just by association at this point, and we have an obligation to protect our democracy, to protect our society, really to ensure our very existence as like biological organic humanity, because these same elites are experimenting with transhuman type stuff. They've subjected the masses to genetic engineering at scale already, and we don't know what the consequences are. They seem to have lost the plot, and they're going totally overboard in they're deluded at this point. That's how it seems. You know, I've admired their abilities over the years, but it seems like more and more people are realizing, like, these people are totally out of control, and it's not clear that they even know what they're doing anymore. So, like, I don't know. I've seen these sorts of suggestions more and more frequently online. The issue is we need that list of names, and we need to round certain people up. and take their stuff because they are criminals against humanity. And like, I think in many instances, it is provable that is the case. I think these people should be held accountable for their crimes. So leave the orthodontists alone. Go after the actual elite, and we can move on. Of course, if the social elite want to maintain their position, they could start moving in the right direction themselves. They could start facilitating this sort of lease program to get more intentional agricultural co-ops going using regenerative methods, incentivize that sort of thing. Incentivize trade schools to facilitate that same regenerative agriculture renaissance. There's a lot of things they could do that could actually help people, but they're not doing those things. So at what point do we say, okay, we're going to take responsibility for our society and stop the predation of a group of people who seem not to care about us at all? So that's what I've been thinking about lately. Let me know what you think. The tax the rich thing, you don't want to counter-signal that too hard. Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, they argue against that in a certain way. Although Joe Rogan seems like open to the idea to a certain extent, but we're not talking about the relevant rich. It's not the 1%. It's the 0.0001%. It's a small list of names, the people who actually hold power. So, yeah. Let me know what you think. Thanks for listening. God bless.